Anuradha, Team 9.9, thank you very much for giving me this honor and this pleasure of being with the Next Gen CFO 100. Anuradha has given me a very kind and gracious introduction. But one of the first things that struck me is that by accident and not by design, what I thought I was going to say to all of you is really the why of what you were all going to do. And that from a perspective which is probably today most relevant. But before I do that, please put your hands together one more time for all the winners and all the people who were part of the consideration. It's indeed something which we all at a young age or an old age are never tired of, which is recognition, felicitation, and an encouragement to go further in whatever it is that you have set out to do. I also can't resist but say that although the host is not in the TV media, the best thing that I heard recently was one of the TV shows which introduced itself by saying that the superstars of tomorrow, no khandan and no sifarish, only talent. I think that describes most of you who are here today. And that is where I hope, and that is my fervent hope, will be the country of the future. I thought that I would address you in a way where I left off in Niti Aayog, which is that the transition from Planning Commission to Niti Aayog by this government in 2014-15 was really a signal that the story of India is a work in progress which cannot be done by government alone. It has to have stakeholders which are not just the people, but people represented in different sectors, not just the bureaucracy, not just the public sector, but the private sector and every person who has a stake in this country and its future must become part of what the story is about. The first generation of economic reforms gave a signal 25 years ago when we opened the country and changed the trade policy and the industrial policy and welcomed very guardedly foreign players into the country. But it also unleashed what would seem to be a huge potential which was not recognized at the time. And yes, every successive government has in its own way endorsed what was started in the 80s and the 90s, which is opening us to the world, opening us to a global scenario where we are all looking at each other through not just a domestic lens, but through an international bifocal lens. This time around, the question that is being asked is the second generation of economic reforms. Is it enough? The simple answer is it is not enough. Much has been done. More needs to be done. The Prime Minister, for the first time, addressed the chambers a few days ago and said that listed 87 reforms, he said, which were across 21 sectors. The sectors which come to mind are, of course, finance, financial services, then defense on the other end of the spectrum, which was completely closed to the private sector. In between fall a lot of other sectors which were listed, like construction, like food processing, and many others. When it's said in a laundry list kind of manner, 87 across 21 sectors, someone's worked very hard, but they're probably not visible to each one of us unless we sit down and look very closely at what has been done. What is staring us all, first of all, is the steps that are being taken to put the banks back on track, something of direct relevance to most of you here today, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and of course the two major steps which were taken in the last year, which have a mixed response, that is both demonetization and GST. While demonetization did not serve the purpose that it was supposed to serve, but is reported to have brought in a lot more people into the formal organized sector, GST, on the other hand, is an unequivocal step forward. The disruption that it has caused to most of the companies, to most of the organized sector, and by default to the small and medium sector and the unorganized sector, is what is coming to us and staring us in the face. But it needed to be done. The disruption needed to occur because it was such a huge step. Whatever way it was executed would not have been perfect. And yes, it would take a few months, it would take maybe a year and a half, some are saying, before everything falls into place. It is a question to ask ourselves, is this all worth it? Is the disruption just a lot of sound and fury, signifying nothing? Is it going to lead to economic transformation, or is it a chimera we are all chasing? It's an illusion, an illusory future that we are all chasing. The answer, I'm sure you've all talked about it in the course of the day, or I saw some of your agenda right in the beginning. And the answer is, as always, not as clear as it should be. We are a complex country, we are a complex economy. The glass is always half full or half empty. The disruptions are what are bothering us the most today. That is what is hitting us and hitting the economy. Because the flip side of the economy is, again, for all of us to see. Private investment is down. Jobs, and jobs, where are they? They don't seem to be anywhere to recovery from the last 2 years when the economy has been sliding. Of course, we were all applauding when Moody's and the World Bank, the whole world, said that we are the only game in town. Foreign investors seem to think so, but sitting here, all of you will question yourself as to, is this really happening? Is this all some huge political drama? The only only response that is clear to me is that reforms have never been populist or popular. The record shows in the last 25 years, every government that has taken what they call economic reforms has not lived to tell the tale. So let's put that aside, that it is certainly not going to earn brownie points for any political party or any party in government. But it needs to be done. The government has to set itself this task and has to go forward and do more. Now let me come to the question, why? You're all going to lead organizations of the future. None of us are very clear. We don't have a crystal ball, but it is amply clear, it is totally, abundantly clear that the organizations of the future are going to be driven by technology, are going to be driven by change, innovation, and creativity. For that to happen, the macroeconomic scenario, the laws which are old, which are outdated, the policies which do no longer serve their purpose need to go. Government needs to actually consciously deregulate, get out of many games, many more games. And what we have been in government, when I was in government and even now, most unsuccessful about, is having placed a new law or a new policy in place, we have not drilled it down to changing processes. That is what I see the future organizations to be successful, they need to be doing. They need to be nimble, they need to be agile, they need to be fleet-footed. Technology will drive not only the change that is coming, but they will drive the way in which you do business. Now, when you do this, why should you be looking at the future and not just within your organizations? For a very simple reason, that most of you will not be in any single organization for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You're working in an environment which is dictated by what I call demographics, diversity, and differences. An average Indian today is 25 years or less, has about 4 to 5 years of schooling, roughly, and I'm being very optimistic. And if the Indian is female, is married and has 2 children. Now, in a demographic of this nature, how do you drive an organization to look for talent? Let me come to the other issue, diversity. Diversity, despite the fact that there's a law which talks about women in boardrooms. The most easy part of diversity is gender. I will not go into the more complex part of looking at every part of the population who are disadvantaged. Just women, there are only 17 CEOs in this country. In the boardroom, despite the law, out of roughly 5,500 BSE listed companies, more than, I have to look at the numbers now so that I don't go wrong, out of approximately 5,541 BSE listed companies, 1,375 are non-compliant. This is a year-old data. And this is despite the fact that there is a law and presumably there is some enforcement of that regulation. 191 out of 1759 NSE listed companies are non-compliant about having women directors. And the kicker of them all, 65 public sector undertakings are non-compliant. 65 companies owned by the President of India is non-compliant to the law which says you must have women directors. 17 CEOs, boardrooms dominated predominantly by one gender, and presumably very little diversity. Let me come to the third aspect, which is the most disturbing of all in the environment that we are going to be in for at least the next decade. One of the fallouts of the first generation of reforms was that we grew at an astounding pace. We were not only the fastest growing, we also expanded the GDP, the national income, and overall well-being of most of our people, or so we thought. But just a few days ago, the World Inequality Report lists India as one of the most unequal countries in the world. What does that mean for us? It means that the top 1% has more than 50% of the national income. What it also says is that the top 1%, which is approximately 8 million people, adults, 8 million adults, are sharing most of the national income. Roughly 390 million adults of this country have, which is 50% of the bottom of the population, has less than 2/3 share of the national income. In an environment such as this, where is the talent coming from? Where are the organizations of the future going to work with? Where are all of you going to meet the challenges? These are not a question of dismal statistics, but these are realities that we all have to grapple with. That whereas the economic reforms did enlarge the pie went to a certain segment. And yes, sitting where we are, unless you are actually looking at the policy canvas from the national point of view or an international point of view, we have done abysmally in both the health and the education sector. As a result, we are not tapping talent. We are not getting the kind of traction that we need for our organizations, for our companies. We need to look at this issue a little more closely, little more compassionately, and will that, to all of you, will answer the question of why you're all doing what you are doing. How you do it is determined by the organizations that you will be in. The 100 CFO 100s may not only be CFOs who keep accounts and do due diligence, but they will be CFOs, I am told, who look at strategy, who look at the future, who look at where the company should be going, and will be the primary drivers of the strategy of the companies that they work for. In fact, it surprised me to see that even the Reserve Bank of India, the regulator of regulators, is looking for a CFO. That says it all. It means that it is not enough to have an accountant. It is not enough to have someone who is well informed on the financials, but someone with a bandwidth, with a canvas which looks at broader issues, the environment in which we are all in, what this environment will mean, not just to the bottom line, but to the future areas and sectors that you will all be working with and doing great things for. Having said this, let me also say that the reforms per se are not enough. Reforms have to be drilled down. They need to go a little further and farther. But that is a continuing process, continuing saga. It will be dictated by a lot of political expediencies, realities. Some aspects which we thought should be done today may not be taken up. Those which are taken up would be, as many have criticized, even the GST, ill-structured and badly implemented, possible. But, as I said, there is no way around it. These are hard questions. We live in a global world, maybe less global as we go along for the next few years, maybe. Maybe we're all looking inwards a lot. And that is one of the reasons why I placed these big issues of demographics, difference, and diversity before you. It's not about quick fixes. It's not about I can fix this or I can fix that. But it is a sense of empathy, of being with all, of feeling for the next person, so that the company is driven by what all of you hold dear: ethics, high values, and a sense of integrity towards the work that all of us do. I think that is something which I can say confidently is a common thread that runs between the policy makers and those of you who make the futures of your companies work for you. In the end, the question of why we do something used to be answered for us when we were much younger. Maybe it is still relevant, and I'll leave this thought with you. In paraphrasing Gandhiji's famous talisman, which is that think of the poorest and the weakest, and think whether the decision that you take will be of any consequence and will it make that person's life better. If it does so in whatever direct, indirect manner, then you're doing right. I think that seems as simple and as straightforward today as it was whenever it was attributed to the father of the nation. So with this, I will stop here, and I will look forward to the felicitation and congratulate all of you once again and say good luck to you, Godspeed, and all the best to all of us in the future in this country. Thank you.